From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good afternoon. It's my privilege and my great pleasure to be talking with the Juilliard String Quartet today. Joseph Lin, Ronald Copes, Roger Tapping, and Joel Krosnick. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
We have the privilege of having a unique perspective on the Juilliard, because the library has witnessed the birth of this magnificent institution and its growth and change over many decades, from the very first performance here, December 10th, 1948. All of the incarnations of this extraordinary quartet, like a jewel with many facets. And I'm so pleased that we're able to present the quartet today, because this is their 70th anniversary this season. And amazingly, they have performed at the Library of Congress for an astonishing 67 of those 70 years. 70 of the library's 90 years in the business of being a concert presenter. Wow. So we're very excited to present you, and I wanted to start by saying that for us at the library, the many profound connections between the Juilliard and the library make this especially meaningful. Perhaps strongest of all is a shared goal, a very strong and enduring commitment to the creation and performance of new music. It's great that they'll be performing Elliott Carter's first quartet today, along with other masterworks by Schubert and Beethoven. And we'd like to talk with you a little bit later about your 50-year relationship with Elliott Carter. But to start with, I wanted to ask you about something that is an example of how the Juilliard continually has a tremendous energy and excitement that brings in new audiences. And that is the new app you have for Schubert's Death in the Maiden. How did you come up with that, and what's been the reaction so far?
Well, the idea of the app was one initiated by the Juilliard School, where we are in residence and all teaching faculty. And the Juilliard School, in various initiatives to extend its reach to new audiences, and one of the ways in which it's exploring is through digital media. And in collaboration with a company based in London called Touch Press, which is a company that creates many very fine educational apps for Apple products. The Juilliard School saw an opportunity to put itself with the Juilliard Quartet into the digital realm in a very exciting new medium, a medium that combines many media that would have been separate in the past. So certainly audio, but also video. And not only video, but a kind of interactive video full of possibilities. In fact, the possibilities are endless and only limited by the amount of memory that you could reasonably expect a product like this to take up in order to be downloadable for those using these devices. I'll let some of my colleagues speak about some of the features of this app and the experience of making it.
Well, I mean, part of the reason for this app is to give not only students of the sort of music that we play, but audiences a chance to hear and think about music in different ways than they would if they were just sitting there at a concert. Among other things, for example, you listen to a quartet play and you hear the balances and sound that and highlighting of materials that we have thought about in preparing the performance. Now, if you listen to this app, you can decide to dial up the viola, for example, and ask to hear the viola at a somewhat more highlighted version of the piece and follow the viola part throughout, or shift and decide you want to hear the second violin or the cello or the first violin, in something that you couldn't really do in public, although depending upon where you're sitting, that may happen naturally, you know. But the idea also is that you, in public, probably don't really get to follow and study the score while you were doing it. Well, if you want in this medium, you can sit and follow the score, and a highlighted score. You can hear voiceovers, if you wish, by the members of the quartet on areas of the score about which we're thinking. It's possible also that various historical information can also be accessed while you're listening or when you're not listening, just studying the piece. So the idea was to give both audience members and non-musicians, as well as musicians, a chance to go further into depth of a great masterwork like Death and the Maiden.
Death and the Maiden, is this on? Can you hear me? Yeah. Death and the Maiden seemed an ideal piece. We just happened to be playing it that season, but it's such an iconic work, and happened to have the extra bonus that it's based on a beautiful song, Death and the Maiden by Schubert. And so also on this app, you can hear a beautiful performance of the song. So it's just a nice extra touch.
There is, in our commentary and also in the analysis, there's a book that goes along with this, an electronic book that, as part of the app, which talks sort of in depth about Schubert's state of mind when he was composing this and some of the historical happenings that were at that time, and some of the long-standing traditions or parts of the Death and the Maiden myth, if you will. It's quite fascinating, a book. And there is a lot of attention to the different elements that we bring to it, as well as to the book, to the different elements that move through the music and are insistent through the music. And I think one of the experiences that I know people who have seen this app have is that they start to become aware of how insistent these things are, and really listen for the underlying dramatic elements coming from these repeated motives.
It's wonderful. As I say, this is an example. You have an incredible energy throughout the years that I've known the quartet, and each year there's some new project. I was thinking just off the top of my head of the wonderful cello and piano new music festival that you did, Joel, with Gilbert Kalish. That was a whole introduction to contemporary music for the instrument, and many recordings, dozens and dozens of world premieres. And as we were saying about Marlborough, we're looking back this year in the rearview mirror for the library's history for so many major and meaningful associations. And regarding the founders of Marlborough who came here, Rudolf Serkin and Adolf Busch and so forth, with the Juilliard, we look at you as family, and not only legendary artists, but as family. But in terms of the work you've done here, there's been an incredible list of commissions, the Martino Coolidge Foundation Commission, Richard Wernick, Irving Fine, and dozens of premieres. So maybe let's talk a little bit about your memories of new music here and what are you doing today that is exciting for the next coming 90 years, 70 years?
Well, I mean, we played a work of a young American composer, Jesse Jones, last year, and we carried that through the year. Next season, the quartet will premiere work by the great Mario Davidovsky, and the quartet continues to, it's not a new music group, and we continue to play classics and the great classic and romantic literature, and we play the music of our time, where we have to go through, as we have with Richard Wernick's 9th quartet this season, and understand somehow what he's put on the page and make it come out in our voices of a recreation of his creation. And we continue to do that, and we discover that when we give it the care, the same care we would give Mozart, Haydn, Beethoven, and everything else, that it turns around and informs us perhaps about curiosities we might have about what's on the page in Haydn, Beethoven, and Mozart. And so it works both ways, to play the works of our time with the care that one would devote to classics, and to perhaps in so doing play the classics as though they were new. You know.
I remember Joel Smirnoff saying that in regard to new music, one element of the Juilliard's deep involvement with this world of contemporary music is that several of your members over the years have been serious composers, and I hadn't thought of that. He mentioned that Robert Mann had studied with Stefan Volpe, also Klaus Adam studied with Volpe, and Sam Rhodes is a composer. Didn't you just do his quintet? What was that like?
We just did Sam Rhodes' quintet. He studied with Roger Sessions and Milton Babbitt. And the quintet is an absolutely beautiful work, sounding like a young man who very much admired Sessions and Babbitt, but at the same time, very much what became Sam's voice as an artist, and again, was quite an involvement. It's a very hard piece, incidentally.
I think there's been a rule, am I right, in the quartet's history that you don't play works of the members as composers, but Sam was retiring, and so he had a sort of loophole here, and it was an opportunity for me as the person who was going to succeed him as to be able to come in and have a sort of overlap and do some concerts to play as the other viola in his quintet, which is a fantastic experience for me. And it's one of the hardest things I've ever played. But I loved it.
My experience in working on Sam's piece and playing and performing it was most of the time when you talk about a composer and you say, there's nobody else who could have written that, it's because that voice is so well established through their compositions. And my reaction to Sam's quintet was, nobody else could have written that, even though I had not ever heard another work of Sam's. We so often heard his voice playing the viola. And so there was something very idiosyncratic and wonderfully Sam.
Wonderful. You know, I came across a comment by Tim Page saying that it's hard to think of another quartet that takes a listener so deeply inside a chosen composition. A wonderful thing to say. And I know that's something you inculcate in your students. And Joel, you've talked very interestingly about this experience about watching your students come into a composition and discovering it and so on. And I wondered if you guys could talk about how we could experience the Carter today with all the wealth of experience you have with Mr. Carter's work. Would you take us inside it?
Well, one of the things we're very empathetic with listeners hearing something for the first time. And we regard ourselves as having the responsibility to be as clear and as communicative about the elements of the work we would like you to hear. And I guess I wish you would listen today and let the piece be what it is to you as it's going by, and recognize what you can recognize and just let it go by you and be there with every moment of the piece as it goes by. For you to try to sit there and figure out the brilliant mind of Elliott Carter as it's going by, I don't know, I can't do that, and I've played a whole lot of pieces of his. But you can allow the music to go by and to realize that there were things in a New York composer's life at that moment, a young man who then chose to spend a year in the Sonoran Desert writing a work. And certain of those things help you reach into the piece. But he intends to communicate with us and through us to you. And I would just allow it to happen naturally.
You know, there's so many things that we could talk about, and we really could do this on in a long oral history session. We should do that sometime. But to move towards something else that is a great connection between the Juilliard and the library are the instruments sitting here in the cases and the many years of experience you have had with them. And I wanted to ask you all, what does the experience of playing a magnificent instrument do for you in performance and even in your understanding of a work, perhaps?
Well, I mean, among other things, I guess I probably played the cello more than anyone else played any of the other instruments. And the Castelbarco cello is a basso. It's a basso da chiesa, so-called. And that is a cello that was designed with a slightly larger bottom part of the instrument to produce sounds from middle C down to the two octaves below, sort of, if you wish, as a continuo instrument, as a lower instrument, perhaps as the lower instrument of a quartet, or in this case, the lower instrument of a trio sonata or a cantata. It has a fantastic lower register. I often wondered while I was playing it, and I loved that cello. I mean, that cello was really fantastic cello. And I often wondered when I played pieces where I was high up on the cello, whether Strad would have been a little surprised to see me meandering up to the top of this instrument that was actually made for its lower register. And yet all of it sounds really fantastic. And I was, from the first time I came, some weeks before I actually began to play it, and the staff of the library kindly provided me a room and the cello, and I spent a day practicing it and playing scales on it and playing various pieces on it. And it was love at first touch. And I loved that instrument, and it's very particularly suited for playing in a quartet because of the lower register. And it's hard to describe, but I played it for many, many years and loved it always.
You know, I saw a quote from you were describing a performance that I actually remember very well at the Smetana Quartet. And you said to a reviewer afterwards that the Castelbarco almost played by itself. And this, you were just, the reviewer described this as a molten performance by Joel Krosnick. And you said that afterwards you looked at the cello and said, "Who are you?" I know Bobby Mann used to say that the Strads were like racehorses, that you couldn't just expect to tame them. You had to be careful and get to know them and so forth. They could run away with you and ruin your performance if you didn't really know what you were doing.
I think in one way, the experience is that they aren't completely under your will, as it were. There's an element of a great instrument which suggests things to you. And so it's not just that they do exactly what you're thinking, they do maybe something even a little bit better. I mean, it's, but a really great instrument does suggest a lot of things.
And following up on that, Joel, we had a young person here recently who said he was trying out this cello, and you had told him about the cello. I'm trying to think of the person, it'll come to me in a second, but he said that you told him to try the instrument and see what he thought, and that afterwards you heard him play in Weil Hall, and you went up to him and said, "You see what a great instrument can teach you." And that was a fascinating comment to me. As you were saying, Ron, you learn so much from the instruments themselves. How does that work in your teaching? Are you able to work with rare instruments at Juilliard as well, sometimes?
Well, there are some very fine instruments in the Juilliard collection. I remember one particularly significant experience where I was trying to illustrate something for a student of mine who's a wonderful, wonderful, brilliant cellist, and played with a lovely, smooth, open sound, and it was very beautiful. And for some reason, I think my cello that I own was being repaired, and I had another instrument. And I wanted him to try that instrument, which he did. And so part of the lesson, I was playing his instrument. And I couldn't get anything out of that instrument, you know, and he'd been producing this gorgeous sound, and I'd been teaching the fellow for several years, and I never had any idea he had an instrument that was difficult to play. And I was open in my admiration. I said, "Young, I had no idea. My God, this is, it's very hard." You know, well, but you learn things from playing an instrument, and he had a sound in his ear, and a sound which he learned physically to produce something that was analogous to what he was hearing. And so one transcends the instrument, but one learns from it. And playing that Strad cello would teach you something about how to love the lower part of an instrument, or how, you couldn't push that cello exactly. You had to wait for it. And it was really wonderful. And the students at Juilliard who have an opportunity to play something beautiful, that's the idea, that they will learn from an instrument that will lead them in the direction of sounds that they might not have imagined.
On the same sort of a flip side of that, not every instrument, or there is no instrument that is really right for everyone. And to illustrate that, perhaps the most famous instrument in the collection here is the Betz Stradivari. And Bobby Mann did not like playing that instrument at all, and used one of the other instruments, whereas Joel Smirnoff loved playing it. And I think some of it has to do with the different styles that we have of playing, the different ways that we produce sound, the different amounts of weight and bow speed that we use. And certain instruments will emphasize one or the other. And you probably knew that very often I didn't use one of the Strads, but rather used the Chrysler Del Gesù, which is also in the collection, because it produced its sound very differently, and it was more suited to the way I was used to producing sound.
We have so many interesting musical comments to think about what you've done here at Strauss, as we talk about, and so forth. And I'm just sitting here thinking how the work that Juilliard Quartet has done at the library is not only a significant part of our history, but of music history, in terms of all the things that have been done here. For example, you brought the Bartók quartets here when that was still a new thing to play them in a group, a cycle of them. And you early on did premiered Villalobos and Ginastera quartets, when no one really knew those, and so on. And a lot of very unusual works. We had the Strad quartet, octet. We did a whole octet evening with the Concord String Quartet. That was cool. We had the instruments from the Smithsonian's collection with ours. But I was thinking too, it might be interesting to see what some of your personal history moments might be. For example, for me and my colleague Michelle Glemp, who's sitting in the audience, we watched you watch the World Series in the back room a lot. Any fun things like that that pop up in your mind? I have to say that was, it's interesting to think about that. We have this tiny studio in the back behind the concert hall, and we sometimes have used it for rehearsals, and I understand that the Budapest Quartet, whom you think of as these very austere and, you know, extraordinary gentlemen from Central Europe and Russia and so forth, that they too used to tune in to the World Series. So what makes the Juilliard, now that you, it's interesting for me to have observed the incarnations of the Juilliard as I've been here, and my former boss, John Newsom, knew a much earlier incarnation, and so you are experiencing this again. You have recently, and now you will again. We had Astrid Sween here recently, and it was very interesting to hear her talking about her career and her looking forward to join the Juilliard and the mentorship that she's been receiving from the school and from the quartet and from you, Joel. But I wanted to ask you, what is your definition of the Juilliard Quartet now?
You know, over the 70 years, the quartet has probably changed in sound in different ways, you know. In a purposeful, specific way, we've never discussed it. We deal phrase by phrase, style by style. We talk about all the things significantly involved in playing, whether it's the Carter First Quartet or the Quartet out of Schubert or the 135 Beethoven from today. And all the different things that one talks about and reaches for and thinks about. No doubt the priorities of those things have changed over the years, but I can't remember any time where we said, well, okay, we're going to change this. This is not, you know, the way we're going to do it any longer. And when people ask us, how has it changed? To tell you the truth, we've got the worst seat in the house. We're inside the workings of Beethoven and Schubert and Carter, and using our instruments and our minds and our imaginations to do what we believe in. And we haven't changed on purpose.
You just mentioned that the activities of the quartet have not only been significant to the library's history, but also to the history of music, what has taken place over the last 70 years. And I don't think at any point along the way the quartet set out to do anything that would be significant historically in the moment of doing any of these things, of playing all the Bartoks, of bringing Hinastera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's a spirit of, as Joel says, doing what is important to us, what we care about, often in the face of contemporary trends, but we feeling that there's some value to it, and at a certain risk that we don't know what will happen when we premiere the work of a 35-year-old, as was the case with Jesse Jones's piece a few years ago. But in a way, the value, part of the value certainly is in that willingness to take the risk. And in some cases, it may prove well worth it. In other cases, maybe not as much, but the spirit remains, and maybe that's more important than whether that, you know, in retrospect gets viewed as a historical moment or particularly significant in the larger scheme, but it's the moment-by-moment attitude.
And I guess in as much as there is a continuity over all the years which continue to make it the Juilliard String Quartet, it is just the sort of basic underlying ethos of four people coming together, extremely open to each other's thoughts and passions and opinions, with a level of trust that the ideas that somebody's going to come up with, which may well not be what you thought of yourself, are really worth considering. And so there's a sort of openness to each other, and that leads to a sense of exploration which keeps the music alive and which keeps you very engaged in the process of rehearsing and very much in the process of performing. And I think that's probably been a constant which leads to a sort of passion and curiosity and seriousness.
I think one of the things that is quite conscious in the quartet's evolution in a way is that we want it to evolve, so that at every step along the way when there's a personnel change, we very consciously are interested not only in someone whose ethos embraces that, or whose ideas embrace that ethos, but also someone who's going to bring different ideas and different ways of thinking about things into the mix. So there's a conscious desire to feel like what we're doing is letting the quartet move in slightly different directions and yet remain with that same ethos.
Wonderful to hear your answers on this. I know that we need to let them get ready to perform and so on. Just want to say, maybe we should open up for, can you take a couple questions? Are you okay with, okay, great. Anyone have a particular question? Yeah?
I just wanted to ask if anyone, if any of the members here played the Broken String concert at the National Academy of Sciences, and what was that like? I mean, I think 3 strings broke, or did 4 strings break?
Broken strings.
Oh, broken strings. Do you remember an event?
Oh, that's right. I remember that. There
When
was an
lots of strings
occasion
broke?
when you were, the quartet was playing at the National Academy of Sciences, and incredibly,
Yes.
one after the other.
It was the third Carter Quartet. And I don't know who went first, but I think Mr. Mann broke a string. And so in about the 60th measure or something, we've been playing for about a minute or so. And so we started again. He went off and changed his string, and we started again. And then I think I was next. And I broke a string, and we started to laugh and went off stage, and I think we got a little further that time. And then, unbelievably, I heard to my left, Mr. Rhodes' string snap. Yeah. That's not possible. And I remember it well, and remember Mr. Mann turning to the audience and said, "You will know the opening 100 bars of Elliott Carter's third quartet better than any audience in history."
I remember once being very grateful for a broken string. As a very young man at a music festival, I played my first performance of Bartók's third quartet, which is pretty scary the first several times you play it. And it had started to go a little wrong, and then somebody's string broke. So we had the chance to start again, and it was much better the second time. It led me to this slightly bad thought that maybe we should have a little invention, some little sort of thing where you could automatically break a string with a little lever from a fingerboard, strategically. Well, yeah.
You mean you don't use yours?
Anyone else have a question? No? Well, thank you so much. Uncompromising integrity, the Juilliard Quartet. Thank you so much.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.